Hello. 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 Um, it's um, it's Saturday night, and I'm here in Exeter, and it's the 23rd of February, and it's been a little while since I've spoken. This is the third, excuse me, this is the third blog, kind of audio blog that I'm doing in this study trip of the UK, and I'm a little bit sick. Um, so I'm still getting used to this. But I wanted to just fill you in on where things are at with this trip in the UK. So for the last 4 days, um, I've come down from London and I went to Brighton, and en route to Brighton, I stopped off at this place called Tonbridge, which is um, about I think it's about an hour out of London. And I met with a fellow by the name of Toby Butler. And Toby Butler is someone who's, I guess, got a lot of brownie points in the world of oral history and placemaking and memory making, and he's quite well known for a project called Memoryscapes, which he did, I think, possibly about 10 years ago. And I was really keen to talk to Toby and just see where things were at with his work, and talk to him about sound trails and the work that we've been doing in Australia. And I have to say, it was a really lovely day. It was a cold day. It was a bit rainy, um, but Toby sort of picked me up in his four-wheel drive, and he took me to this um, place, which I think it was 600 years old, and it had been originally a pub, um, and then it became a bit of a centre point for all the people who were involved in the hopping industry, which is, of course, with the hops, the beer hops. And am I right in thinking it was Kent, just out of London? Quite beautiful countryside, and all around you can see the drying kilns of the former hop industry. So this place where Toby took me to was a place where the quite a few of the community from East London used to come down, and they used to do the hops down there, and it would be 3 weeks work, which would be like the summer holidays. And over the years, apparently it was a really mixed bag of people from East London would come down and do the season. And so Toby had done this amazing collection of oral histories and a lot of research with the East London community around the whole sort of phenomena of the hop season. And I guess he's kind of interested to see ways in which he can build maybe something which is locative to to sort of testify and acknowledge the lives that these people have lived over the years. And he took me around a few of the farms, and there are the old hoppers sheds still there all over the place. And the thing that I didn't realise was that it was such a rich mix of different people from different nationalities. And I suppose because it was the East London community, um, for many people, it was really, it was a really healthy and constructive thing for them to do, and it was one of those real binding time for the families to come down to, is it Kent and Suffolk, um, to go and work on the hops, and there were the old time families, there were the new arrivals, the new migrant arrivals, there were gypsies, and this place where he took me had often been a centre point for the hopping community, where they would have kind of events and dances and stuff like that. So it was a really kind of interesting sort of foray into that world, and we talked about the possibility of working together, and how something like this might be put together. And I guess we just sort of got to know each other. So that was lovely. It was really nice to meet him, and he's really renowned as a leader in the field of oral history, placemaking, um, and early digital placemaking projects. Yeah, really quite groundbreaking, actually. So that was my first day out of London, and I caught the train down there, which was new, very new for me. And then I went from Tonbridge, and I went down to Brighton, which was two trains, and that was a bit scary too. Anyway, so I got to Brighton, and I spent probably the best part of 3 days looking to connect with people and to try to do some geolocative walks down there. And I didn't really find a lot that was happening, but I did do quite a lot of research on some other projects. And also, one of the really great things was I connected with blast theory in Brighton. Well, it's not quite Brighton, it's not quite Hove, it's that next one over. And I met this guy called Matt Adams, who is, I think, quite a figurehead with blast theory. Did I say blast theory? It's blast theory. Um, and it was interesting to finally get to blast theory, because I've had a little bit of correspondence with these guys, and I've been seeing their tweets come through for probably about the last 6 months, and been watching all this amazing stuff that they're doing in the world of performance, online performance, streaming, documentaries, theatre, festival material. They're really innovative, they're really groundbreaking, and they're really sort of testing all sorts of new and interesting and exciting projects in the digital media field. And so we spent, I don't know, probably about an hour and a half having a really lovely chat. And it was really revelatory for me to speak to someone who's obviously just got this big sweep of an understanding of the different projects that have been operating around the place, and where things like geolocative audio, geolocative media might fit into that. And while blast theory have, I guess you could say, kind of moved on, or they're probably sort of involved in other projects. It was really interesting to hear a couple of the projects that they'd been working on. One particularly, which is no longer operative, but excuse me, it's it was called Fixing Point, and I think it's played at a couple of festivals. And the thing that I really loved about Fixing Point was just its sheer simplicity. And I think the premise uh, behind this was that they would use geolocative technology to allow people to explore a story in a very simple way. They wouldn't spend too much time kind of building an app and building a system and doing development. They'd do it in a very sort of rudimentary way. Anyway, so they built this app, and they housed this project called Fixing Point, which was around the disappearance of a man who apparently was murdered by the IRA. And his name was, what was his name? Seamus, somebody or other. And for me, one of the reasons why it was really interesting is because I think it's an example for me of the ways in which journalism might approach polemic stories that invite people to really piece together what the story is behind these incidents. And this guy who had disappeared, he was one of a number of people who had obviously been bumped off during the political crisis of the conflict between Northern Ireland and England, the IRA and the English, and he had never. No one knew where he'd been buried. Apparently, he had been buried. I think he was abducted in Paris, and so no one knew where he'd been buried. So the whole premise behind this geolocative project, which is, I think 7 or 8 years old now, Fixing Point, was that um, you would walk in and out of about 6 sound fields that were extracts from a recording that one of Blast Theory's producers did with the sister of this fellow who had disappeared. And she's talking about the information that she knew about what happened, and obviously talking about how they'd waited to see if they could find this fellow. And of course they never did. They don't know what's happened to the guy. And I think it really got me thinking about the ways in which placing stories on country um, it can be such an incredibly effective way of prompting people to sort of think, and it becomes a very sort of tactile and connecting um, uh, way of interacting with what's going on. Now, the amazing thing is for me is that story didn't really pertain to the site um, that they showcased it at the festival. I think they did one in Brighton, and I think they did another one somewhere else. But what they did was they set something like 6 anchor points across an area, and they placed geolocative fields. And then the idea was that you would have find that anchor point in the ground, in the scrub somewhere, and that would sort of testify to the fact that you'd found something, but there was this unresolved sort of dimension to the whole unresolved story of what happened to these men, and also that you could take that piece and you could place it in another festival, and you could pretty much do the same thing. You'd obviously have to find a different piece of ground. Um, I think there was original sound composition, which was done by a pretty slick artist that obviously sort of was really resonant with the story, with the interview with the sister, and the whole sort of nature of the piece. And I just kind of love the simplicity of that, and it really got me thinking about the place at which journalism is at the moment, where there's a lot of focus around VR, but just how powerful something like an auxiliary project, like something like Fixing Point, could be in tandem with some other uh, journalism works that might be showcasing an issue, a set of circumstances, uh, a political event, and it could be really ubiquitous, where it could be taken around different festivals, or used in a variety of ways, where the stories have, I guess, a resonance with a place, but they don't necessarily speak directly to that place. And I'm thinking here of Vanitas in Australia, where they're obviously able to take that to different cemeteries, and it's the same stories, but they speak as a sort of an overarching kind of thematic around cemeteries. And it also got me looking at a project by Chris Brooks from Battery Road. I think it's called Battery Road, and he's in Newfoundland in Canada. And again, this is for me another example of where I think journalism and geolocative media might really kind of start to sort of marry more in the future. And it's a project which is based around a fairly famous rape case in Newfoundland. And they've gathered, I think, testimonies from people and court records, and they've patched together a range of stories along the actual district where the rape was allegedly took place. And I think this one's different than something like Fixing Point, which is very ubiquitous and you could place Fixing Point pretty much anywhere, whereas uh, the consent geolocative app is very much grounded at that on those streets in that particular town where that event took place. And apparently, it's been quite effective in terms of making people sort of front up to the issues. I believe there's a police officer who there was a charge levels against, and he's got off. So it's a pretty bold sort of move, something like consent. And again, I think it's a really interesting sort of showcase for the way in which journalism and geolocative work are, there's a possible future for that. So that was blast theory, and it was great to talk to Matt from Blast Theory about just the sheer volume of projects which has come out of there, and um, there it is on a sort of a windswept kind of a traffic strewn sort of harbourside or coastal road overlooking the industrial wharves of of Brighton, the Brighton area. And I mean, the stuff that Blast Theory's been doing over the last few years, when I've been aware of it, it really is amazing, and it was a real honour to be in there. Uh, and certainly some of the stuff which they're doing is breaking new ground. And I was very conscious that to do some of the projects that they're they've they've they're courageous. They're courageous projects, and they're pushing new ground in terms of what this type of media can do, which is I think it's festival. It's very performative. It's quite theatre based, and they're really interested in seeing how they can kind of uh, take this further. It was also great, picking Matt's brains about what projects are out there, and what he sees is really good. So from Brighton, I hired a car and I braved the roads over here to Exeter, which was a 3.5 hour drive, and it was an interesting moment for me. Having to get my head around driving. At least it's the right side of the road, and but the roads are really busy here, and people drive fast, so that took a bit of getting used to. In Exeter, yesterday I drove down to Falmouth, which is right at the south of the very southern tip of the UK. And there's a beautiful little university I think it's called Falmouth University. And I met a lovely woman called Abigail Wincott, and she teaches journalism, and she's got a real aptitude for sound. I think she's done previous work at the BBC, so she's really sort of cottoning on to the way in which uh, locative narratives and virtual VR and sort of new digital projects are deploying sound, and the ways in which journalism is changing. And we had a really lovely chat about Sound Trails, what Sound Trails is doing. Um, and again, we talked about some potential work maybe down the track, and that was lovely. Um, and then today, I've been very lucky, by the way. It's been beautiful weather, well, relatively beautiful. They say it's beautiful, even though it's kind of misty and a high of about 12 degrees. Apparently, it could have been a lot worse. Apparently, this time last year there was snow everywhere, and it was really nasty and icy. And also, too, I just want to say, people are just so incredibly receptive to me asking to speak to them. They're very open to that. People are finding time to talk with me, and they're very supportive. And I think people are genuinely very interested to hear about what I've been doing with Sound Trails back in the big brown land, Australia. So today I went to, crikey, where did I go to? I went to Dartington. Dartington, and I did an app called Letters by a woman called Emma Whittaker. And Emma first came to my attention because she was the woman who was working alongside James Attlee with the Cartographer's Confession. And being so smitten with the Cartographer's Confession, I was really interested to know how James sort of found his groove with the architecture of the app and how to kind of, I suppose, graft the creative writing process through to a system that's clearly got limits and functions that it can use and things it can't do. So James had to work very kind of closely within that sort of rubric. And of course, when I'm talking to James, he sort of confessed that he really didn't have a lot of understanding about the way geolocative media worked, and that really, in some ways, when he was commissioned to do the piece, it was working with Emma Whittaker, who I spoke to today, that really helped him come to grips with how he would adapt a story for a geolocative piece like Cartographer's Confession. So I was really keen to, I guess, fit the last of the pieces into the puzzle with the Cartographer's Confession and see what it had been like for Emma to work with James, and also what her role had been as a go-between the developers and also a writer, a travel writer like James. And so prior to meeting with Emma today at crikey, I wish I could remember. Sorry, I've just Dart. My memory is absolutely lousy. London, Exeter, Dartington. Dartington. And Dartington is this remarkable place. It's obviously, there's heaps of things here that I don't really fully understand, but it seems to be a bit of a hub for creatives, for environmental people, for organic farming, for a whole raft of fairly sort of forward-thinking projects. And it's got a movie theatre, it's got, I think, 3 cafes, and it's got these wonderful sort of beautiful grounds with lots of flowers coming up and gorgeous old trees, and you're free to kind of pretty much wander where you want to. And Emma had produced had produced an app some years ago with her husband, which is pretty impressive actually. So Emma had done a PhD. She'd done a PhD on locative narratives, of all things, and the app that she produced was called Letters, and it's available in the App Store. I think it's a great app. I think she's really got some really great things going here, and it's based around the letters between a husband. I think it was a husband and wife. Anyway, it was the letters between two partners who soon became married, and it was, I guess, it was when they were engaged to get married, but they were both traveling overseas, and he was writing her letters and she was writing him letters, and these letters were often telegrams or they were letters, and there was often a real mismatch between the timing. And it's this series of extracts from the letters that sort of testify to not only the relationship when they're both traveling overseas, but it also has all the seeds of what the place becomes, his vision for the place, her sort of having to kind of feel out whether or not she wants to come through to Dartington and live there because she's American, he's English, and it's I don't know. I mean, I probably didn't really get that engaged in the characters or say the actual um, layering of the words and the way in which the words were delivered, like the cartographer's confession. But I found it a really impressive interface, and um, and it's really interesting. I think Emma's doing really interesting stuff, and I think she's got a really good handle on the way in which locative media is now able to build these different sort of frameworks, these different architectural frameworks for these types of stories. And she's done an amazing array of different projects, and I'm gobsmacked by the work that she's done. And I think the work that she did with James is really noteworthy too. And I think it was great to talk to her about how that process sort of unfolded from James not really having any idea, and him having a very rudimentary sort of concept of what sort of story he might build through to what I think is a very tight and accomplished piece of literary geolocative storytelling, which is the cartographer's confession. And I think that role that she played in sort of working alongside him, I think was was so important. And it was interesting talking to her about that and asking her what she had really enjoyed about the cartographer's confession. And both of us agreed that it was the craft of writing and the craft of storytelling and the beautiful eye for detail for the people's lives and the places and the intimate sort of insights into the streets of London along the Thames that James brought so splendidly to that project. And it was great. It was really great kind of sort of trying to get how they sort of worked in that process. And of course, something like the cartographer's confession, there's a team of people behind something like this, and Emma's she terms herself more as a researcher in this, whereas James talks about Emma's role more as a experienced designer, which is a really interesting piece of um, terminology. And yeah, I mean, I think I don't really sort of want to go too much into that. Um, but again, Emma was an absolute kind of storehouse of information about different projects that are out there. She says that at the moment, uh, digital uh, digital kind of media in its innovative sort of iterations is really going off at the moment in the UK, and there's a lot of projects that are underway. She said, "I'm going to the right place, which is Bristol, where I'll be meeting the ambient literature team with Jonathan Dovey and Tom Aber, and I'll also be meeting Duncan Speakman, and I'll be doing his project, which is part of the ambient literature suite. There were three projects: the Cartographer's Confession by James Attlee. There was a project called Breath, which was by Kate Pullinger, and there was also Duncan Speakman's It Must Have Been Dark by Then, and I'm doing that project on the 9th. Duncan's going to meet me at the Pervasive Media Studios and set me up, and I'll sort of head off. Tomorrow, I'm having a day off, and then on the 25th, on Monday, I'm meeting with Josh Kopacek, sorry, Josh, from Echoes, the Echoes platform, and going to be finding all about what he's up to and talking, some possible projects together with Sound Trails. So all will be revealed. So thank you very much. I hope whoever you are who's listening to this, you're finding this useful. And thank you so much to Arts Queensland for supporting this project, for making this happen, and all my friends and family for helping me get here. Thank you. Bye-bye. Nope.